On November 18, 2013, an incident occurred at the border between Southern California and Mexico that later made headlines across the United States. It cost the U.S. government $1 million, but that's not the highest price paid for this incident. On November 18, 2013, at approximately 6:20 a.m., cameras at the U.S.-Mexican Customs Office captured a young man confidently heading for the so-called simplified inspection, which is designed for those who cross the border several times a day. For example, this simplified inspection is intended for people who live in Mexico, but for one reason or another work in Southern California. However, this particular young man, in particular, caught the attention of customs officials. The young man's name was Cruz Velazquez. He was 16 years old at the time. He told customs officials he was going to visit a friend for a couple of days. The boy's name was Cruz Velazquez. He was 16 years old at the time. He told customs officials he was visiting a friend for a couple of days. But the customs officials became very interested in his bag, so they asked him to undergo additional baggage inspection. During the inspection, the customs officer noticed that the young man was becoming seriously nervous. And he decided to refer the boy to officers, handling enhanced searches of luggage and questioning suspicious passengers. The officers on duty that day were Adrian Perry and Valerie Bayard. They first checked the boy's documents, which they found to be okay, and then they began inspecting his baggage. Officer Bayard opened the boy's bag, revealing, in addition to his clothes, 2 bottles of some kind of liquid, which aroused the officer's particular suspicion. And every year, a huge amount of narcotics is smuggled from Mexico into the United States, including through smugglers who transport them under the guise of something legal. Shortly before that day, customs officials received information that the cartels may be smuggling methamphetamine in the form of a powder dissolved in liquid. Officers suspected that this was exactly the case, but the young man. However, the young man claimed it was just apple juice, so officers, Adrian Perry and Valerie Bayard, decided to break protocol and play the young man at his own game. According to the protocol, if there is a suspicion of narcotics in a liquid, food or the like, customs officials must seize the suspicious items and conduct a rapid drug test on them. Instead, the smiling officers challenged the young man to prove the liquids were free of any illegal substances by taking a few sips from their own bottles. The young man has no choice but to comply. He knows what's really in the bottles. That's why his sips are so hesitant. The officers have already realized what's in the bottles, but instead of adhering to standard protocol, they continue to play the guy at his own game. That's why. So, immediately after the boy quickly tries to spin the bottle, Agent Valerie Bayard tells him to take another sip. They wonder how far he's willing to go to hide the truth. At some point, they themselves go too far in this deadly game. Just 2 minutes after the first 2 sips, Officer Adrian Perry, knowing it's dangerous for the teenager's health, offers him 2 more sips with a smile, supposedly of apple juice. The boy understands there's no turning back, but he also understands that every next sip could be his last. So his sips become less and less confident, but nevertheless, he still tries to prove that the bottles are just apple juice. The officers already know they won't let him go. They check his identification once again. At this point, the first signs of discomfort appear. He begins sweating profusely. His body begins to shake slightly, and he becomes increasingly nervous. Customs then conducts a personal search of the young man, but finds nothing illegal in his clothing, though they are certain he's clearly involved in something. Their doubts are dispelled by a customs dog trained to sniff out drugs. It signals that the young man has been in contact with illegal substances, after which his partners handcuff him and take him to the security room for a more thorough interrogation. By now, about half an hour has passed since his first sip from the bottle. The young man is brought to the security desk to fill out the necessary paperwork, and everyone around him finally begins to notice that something is clearly wrong with the young man. Officer Valerie Bayard, the same woman who offered the boy his first sip, checks his body temperature, which, by tactile sensation, is extremely high. The boy begins to scream loudly in Spanish, my heart, and his insides literally twist. And he screams louder and louder in pain. Only now do the officers call for medical assistance. By the time the ambulance arrived, the young man's body temperature had reached 106 degrees Fahrenheit, 41 degrees Celsius. He was immediately taken to the nearest hospital, where, approximately 2 hours after his first sip, he died of a drug overdose. The bottles he was carrying did indeed contain methamphetamine. 16-year-old Cruz had recently been recruited by the cartel, and this was his first attempt at drug smuggling. Cartels specifically target underage girls and boys for smuggling, as if caught at the border, they face only a few months in prison and subsequent deportation. Most likely, the young man feared not such a ridiculous punishment. But what awaited him back home if he failed the mission? That's why he decided to play this deadly game with customs officers. Officer Valerie Beert was taken to the hospital with Cruz, believing she also needed medical attention due to her contact with a bottle containing methamphetamine. Ironically, she was standing next to Cruz's room and heard his dying screams. After this incident, an investigation was conducted, during which both Valerie Beert and Adrian Perry denied that they offered the guy deadly sips. They assured the investigators that he did it. And despite the fact that the security footage clearly showed that this was not the case, they were not punished for this incident.
I never asked him to. He volunteered to, and I believe I gestured to him to go ahead.
You told him to go ahead and drink on more than one occasion, did you not?
No.
And you're sure of that?
I'm sure.
Predictably, Cruz's family described him as a smart and kind man who simply fell in with the wrong crowd. They later won $1 million in compensation from the U.S. government for Cruz's death, which they believe was due to the negligence of customs officials. They maintained that the 16-year-old's death is entirely the fault of officers Perry and Baird. However, many believe Cruz himself is to blame for his death, and that it wasn't his choice at customs that day. He made his choice much earlier, when he decided to become part of a large Mexican drug empire.